6:03 a.m., Tuesday. The sun is just creeping over the line of tall pines, brushing gold across my cedar fence. I'm standing there with an untouched cup of coffee that's already gone refrigerator cold, staring out at the backyard I've poured 12 years of sweat and healing into. $1.8 million of land, and yet I feel like a trespasser on it. On the other side of the fence, in my wife's old rose garden, stands Delphine Ashworth, the HOA Empress of Meadowbrook, dressed in a blazing red power suit like she's dedicating a new wing of a hospital. Nearly 20 neighbors crowd around her. Cameras out, big smiles. She lifts silver scissors. Snip! The red ribbon drops. A sparkling sign is hammered into place a second later. Community Garden, a gift from the Meadowbrook HOA. Funny thing is, that gift is planted directly on Sarah's rose bed, the same roses she tended every morning until cancer took me from her 3 years ago. Everyone claps for Delphine's brilliant initiative. The applause hits my ears like gravel in a blender. I don't hear cheering. I hear scissors slicing through everything Sarah ever loved. My phone buzzes in my pocket. Jake Sullivan, my childhood friend, now the governor of the county. Saw the garden on the news. Looks fantastic. Quick question, whose property is that on? Fantastic. They didn't just steal my land. They broadcasted their theft to the man who signs half their permits. Neighbors crowd Delphine for selfies. She's posing like she just cut the ribbon on a national monument. Meanwhile, the only thing I can think is, they threw a party on my land. They vandalized Sarah's roses, and they accidentally invited the most powerful man in the county to witness it. So tell me, what would you do if your HOA bulldozed your late wife's garden and live-streamed the crime to the governor? Because this story, it only gets uglier from here. Next up, court filings, a 7-figure lawsuit, and Delphine's buried secret that detonated the whole HOA. But before we get there, let me rewind and show you how a quiet man ended up watching his dead wife's flowers get destroyed on live TV. My name is Rex Thornfield, 52 years old, widower, electrician, a man who genuinely believed that buying 1.2 acres in Meadowbrook back in 2011 was the start of a golden life. Sarah, my wife, my anchor, picked this place herself. She fell in love with that half-acre clearing in the back, imagining the pottery studio we'd build there. She called it my dirt therapy zone. She said it was the place we'd grow old together. We closed on the property for $340,000, which at the time felt like we were robbing the bank. Those first years were magic. Morning coffees in the yard while deer nosed around her rose bushes. Afternoons spent sketching layouts for her future studio. Even evenings strolling through her lavender as she talked about turning the space into a sanctuary for local wildlife. Everyone in the neighborhood adored her. Sarah baked cookies for HOA meetings, organized spring cleanups, and even helped design those horrendously expensive community mailboxes. She believed in community, sometimes too much. Because then came Delphine Ashworth, 8 years ago. BMW X5, temporary tags, designer sunglasses, the kind of woman who treated every conversation like a job interview she intended to win, a real estate agent with a hunger for control. Sarah welcomed her with homemade bread, tried to show her which plants survived the winters best. Big mistake. Within 6 months, Delphine seized control of the HOA. Within a year, 3 families quietly moved out under personal reasons. But everyone knew. Delphine had found microscopic violations, grass slightly too long, holiday lights up a few days late, a car parked inches over a boundary, and turned them into full courtroom dramas, hearings, fines, threats. Sarah tried to stay neutral. Not our circus, not our monkeys, she'd say, trimming her roses as Delphine sanitized the neighborhood one victim at a time. Then cancer arrived, like a wrecking ball. Ovarian, stage 3. 18 months of chemo. 18 months of hope and heartbreak and nights where I held her while she shook from pain. Even during her worst days, she kept drawing plans for that pottery studio. She wanted to donate part of our property someday, turn it into a little sanctuary, a green space no one could ever pave over. The week before she died, she whispered to me, "Don't let anyone turn our place into a parking lot. Promise me, Rex." I gave her that promise. 3 weeks after her funeral, Delphine came after me. First, courtesy notices. "Your roses are unkempt. Your shed is unsafe. Your brush is attracting wildlife." No empathy, no pause, just paperwork. I ignored her. I was barely surviving. Mistake number 2. Then she appeared at my door with a clipboard and the soft, syrupy voice funeral directors use on grieving families. "Rex, we understand loss can impact property upkeep. The HOA is prepared to step in if you're unable to manage." My grief became her opening. 3 months later, she returned with a man in a reflective vest, measuring every inch of my yard like they were preparing a construction bid. I was working back-to-back shifts rewiring the emergency systems downtown. Thomas Vega, my neighbor, later told me he saw them pacing and pointing, but assumed it was standard HOA nonsense. If only. Because Delphine doesn't just run the HOA, she controls a whole ecosystem. Her husband, a senior executive at the bank that handles almost every mortgage in the county. Her real estate firm pulls strings with appraisers, inspectors, even permit offices. Cross her, and your loan suddenly gets reviewed. Your home value mysteriously dips. Your building permit vanishes for months. Then came the morning everything snapped. I was drinking from Sarah's blue ceramic mug with the roses she painted on it. I'd finally gathered the strength to sort her pottery tools when my phone exploded with notifications. Janet Kruger, the neighborhood's loudest Facebook warrior, had posted, "Huge thank you to Delphine Ashworth for fixing the Thornfield property. The community garden will boost everyone's home values." Attached, full architectural renderings. Raised beds, a tool shed, parking space. All of it sitting squarely on my land over Sarah's roses. I drove straight to the county assessor's office. Martha Hendress shuffled through my files, 12 years of clean records, and tapped a freshly steepled stack on her desk. "Everything checks out. Clear title, original survey, nothing odd here." Then her face changed. Almost a flinch. "Actually, it is odd. A woman in a red suit requested the same documents 2 weeks ago. She said she was planning community development." My stomach bottomed out. Coffee soured in my mouth. Delphine had been preparing this move like a seasoned criminal. Quietly, legally, meticulously. She didn't just steal my land. She drafted the blueprint before I even realized I was being robbed. I drove home gripping those documents like they were the last rope keeping me from falling off a cliff. I dialed Delphine before I even took off my shoes. Maybe, just maybe, this was a misunderstanding blown out of proportion. She answered with that artificial sympathy voice she reserves for funerals and real estate deals gone bad. "Oh, Rex, grief can distort how you remember property lines. According to our certified surveyors, that back lot has always been designated community space. I'm sure Sarah would want her land to benefit the neighborhood." She weaponized my wife's memory like it was a tool in her purse. Gaslighting me about my own deed while invoking Sarah's name was a new level of cold-blooded manipulation. The gall of it was almost artistic. Back in my union apprentice days, Old Man Murphy drilled a rule into us. Crooked people leave paperwork. If they're lying, kid, the permits will betray them. That crusty wisdom suddenly felt like prophecy. So I marched to the clerk's office and filed a public records request. Paid the $47 in cash, no hesitation. I wanted every permit, email, and scrap of bureaucratic trash connected to Delphine's so-called community garden. 3 days later, the envelope arrived. When I opened it, the truth hit the table like a live grenade. There it was, Delphine's permit application. She had certified under penalty of perjury that my back acreage was abandoned HOA-owned land requiring environmental restoration. The photos she included were an absolute masterclass in manipulation.
She'd cropped angles to make Sarah's pottery shed look like a condemned shack. She framed the blackberry patch as hazardous overgrowth. She marked my wife's roses as invasive brush. But the masterpiece? The fake logs and receipts. Landscaping invoices from companies that didn't exist. Maintenance reports naming HOA workers who had never stepped foot on my property. She created a parallel universe, on paper, in which she owned my land outright. And then I saw the signature. James Cash Jim Croker, Deputy County Administrator. The same guy who shows up in golf photos with her husband Bradley every Thursday afternoon. This wasn't neighborhood politics. This was coordinated corruption. Storming Delphine's office would have felt satisfying, but Murphy's voice echoed in my head. Don't yell, document. Liars hang themselves if you give them enough rope. So, I built my arsenal. 12 years of utility bills showing I maintained the shed. Tax receipts, time-stamped photos of every square inch of the property. Copies of Sarah's sketches showing her planned studio. If Delphine wanted a paperwork war, I'd drown her in evidence. But Delphine wasn't finished tightening her noose. The next HOA meeting felt like a public execution disguised as a civic gathering. She moved the meeting to her friend's real estate office, Home Field Advantage, and filled the room with 23 uncomfortable neighbors who clearly didn't want to be there. Her PowerPoint was corporate theater at its highest budget level. Community wellness initiatives improve property values by 15%, flashed on the projector while she narrated like a TED Talk speaker. Then she switched gears, and the character assassination began. Unfortunately, since Mr. Thornfield's personal tragedy, the property behind his fence has fallen into disrepair. Several residents can verify the ongoing issues. 5 people stood as if on cue. Thomas Vega mumbled something about abandoned lots. Janet Kruger sighed theatrically about declining neighborhood standards. Bradley's banking buddies echoed rehearsed lines about maintaining community integrity. 2 of Delphine's real estate clients chimed in with nearly identical phrasing like they'd practiced in the parking lot. I recorded the entire circus on my phone. Every lie, every coached statement, every smirk Delphine shot toward the screen like she was conducting a choir of obedient puppets. The stale office smelled like burnt coffee, nervous sweat, and overpriced perfume, an olfactory snapshot of betrayal. After the meeting ended, I caught Thomas in the parking lot under flickering sodium lights. "Really, Thomas? My property is abandoned?" He stared at the pavement like it held the secrets of the universe. "Rex, Delphine's handling my mom's listing. She hinted that supporting the community garden would help attract serious buyers." There it was. Pressure. Leverage. Real estate extortion masquerading as civic engagement. I walked back to my truck hearing Delphine's final declaration resonate in my skull. Construction begins in 2 weeks. Materials ordered, contractors hired. The community deserves progress, with or without Mr. Thornfield's cooperation. She declared war, and she didn't know I had just recorded her confession. Tuesday, 7 a.m. Diesel engines shattered the quiet like a bad omen. 3 trucks rumbled to a stop outside my fence. The magnetic signs on the doors read, "Burley Brothers Construction," printed so cheaply they probably peeled if you breathed on them. Out stepped a man built like a beer fridge with arms, Dale Ashworth, though at the time I didn't know he was Bradley's cousin. His swagger screamed someone had promised him an easy paycheck. "Morning, Mr. Thornfield," he barked, holding a clipboard like it was a badge. "We're here for site prep and environmental assessment. County permits are in order. Need access to your back lot." 3 workers marched toward the property line, hauling tools, acting like they owned the deed. Metal clinked, equipment hummed. They started measuring around Sarah's roses like they were surveying a parking lot. "Gentlemen," I said, stepping forward, "that is private property." Dale's smile could have stopped antifreeze from flowing. "We have HOA authorization. If you interfere, I'll call Sheriff Santos." His men were already pounding stakes into my soil while one snapped photos like this was legitimate documentation. Mrs. Peterson peeked through her curtains across the street, probably preparing the fastest gossip text chain in county history. That night, I didn't sleep. I installed a full security network, military-grade trail cams with night vision, GPS timestamps, and perimeter triggers. If they wanted to trespass again, they'd be the stars of their own crime reel. Then I printed a dozen weatherproof no trespassing signs using exact coordinates from my survey. As Murphy always said, make 'em prove you're wrong with math.
I hit back hard. I submitted trail cam footage showing Dale's crew stomping across my property line, plus a clean audio clip of him admitting Delphine misled them about permits and approvals. But the real twist came when I examined Delphine's paperwork. The header read, Meadowbrook Community Development, LLC. 5-minute search on the Secretary of State's database, 0 matches. No filing, no corporate number, no record of existence. Delphine had invented an entire corporation just to file legal documents. That isn't HOA overreach, that's felony-level falsification. And once cracks appear in a dam, the flood follows. Neighbors started approaching me in whispers, like undercover informants handing off classified intel. Janet confessed that Delphine threatened to tank her home sale if she didn't support the Garden Initiative. Then old Wendell Pike, leaning on his cane like he carried the weight of the whole neighborhood, revealed she had scared him with talk of tax reassessments that could wipe out his retirement budget. In a single week, it became painfully clear. This wasn't just about my backyard. Delphine had turned the entire subdivision into her personal extortion ring, using fear, paperwork, and Bradley's banking clout to squeeze anyone who dared resist her empire. The fragrance of the few roses that survived the bulldozer blended with the sharp scent of ink and paper as my evidence stack grew, and I understood something. This wasn't about saving my property anymore. It was about stopping the predator who had hollowed our community from the inside. Thursday morning, a voicemail nearly made me spill my coffee. Mr. Thornfield, this is County Environmental. We've received reports of hazardous waste and wetland violations on your property. Inspector Rodriguez will arrive Monday. Potential fines up to $50,000. $50,000? For what? Pottery clay and rose fertilizer? Delphine had escalated from lies to nuclear warfare. Her anonymous accusations claimed I'd been dumping chemical waste, destroying wetlands, and operating an unregulated kiln that endangered community health. I grabbed the phone book and called every environmental consultant within 30 miles. Only one responded, Dr. Elena Vasquez. She showed up Friday afternoon with soil testers, pH monitors, sampling equipment, and the confident attitude of someone who destroyed more than one fraudulent complaint in her career. Let's find out what kind of apocalypse you've supposedly created, Elena said. Her sensors chirped and beeped as she circled Sarah's pottery zone, the afternoon sun glinting off her instruments while birds chattered overhead. 2 hours later, she handed me a preliminary report that I wanted to frame. Mr. Thornfield, your land doesn't just pass, it excels. The runoff from your wife's pottery clay created a mini wetland that supports native species. This is one of the healthiest microhabitats I've inspected all year. Then she delivered the revelation that snapped everything into focus. Odd thing. Someone called me last month pretending to represent your property, wanted to know how to fast-track environmental violations, asked if forced condemnation could be accelerated. My stomach dropped. What did you tell them? I told him it sounded like fraud and hung up. Now I'm realizing someone was shopping for an expert willing to fabricate problems. She raised an eyebrow. Your HOA president wouldn't happen to drive a white BMW, would she? Delphine had tried to hire specialists to invent environmental disasters. When that didn't work, she simply conjured violations out of thin air. That afternoon, I filed a full ethics complaint with the county. My union steward once said, if an official uses the system to punish you, make it permanent. Ethics complaints stay on the record longer than politicians do. But Delphine had already launched her next offensive. Her Facebook group, Meadowbrook Environmental Action, blew up overnight. She posted carefully edited snapshots of my property with captions like unregulated hazard zone, ecosystem collapse caused by negligent landowner, toxic threat to neighborhood children. Within 72 hours, she'd amassed 200 members, all whipped into a frenzy by Delphine's staged evidence. Then she organized a community safety photo event, which was basically spy training for bored suburbanites. They documented my property from every possible angle. Some used ladders. One even brought a drone. Janet secretly joined the group and sent me screenshots of Delphine's coaching. Focus on anything that looks like contamination. Mention children's safety, county responds faster. Use angles that make the shed loom larger. It was like watching a fear campaign masterclass. Monday's inspection. Inspector Davis Montenegro arrived with a stack of clipboards and an expression of someone bracing for chaos. Delphine materialized seconds later, flanked by 3 self-appointed observers, all demanding transparency and accountability like this was a congressional inquiry. My backyard transformed into a stage. Montenegro tested soil, checked drainage, measured runoff, all while Delphine hovered, pointing, narrating, dramatizing. Then Elena arrived with her full report, and the whole charade evaporated. Clean soil, normal pH, no toxins, no violations. None. Montenegro stamped the paperwork, environmentally compliant. Delphine exploded, questioning his training, the validity of his equipment, and demanding an independent lab investigation as if she was cross-examining him in court. Once everyone dispersed, Montenegro walked over to me near Sarah's pottery wheel. I've seen this pattern for years. Agents stir up environmental panic to force sales. Your president was coaching observers on which angles looked most incriminating. That's evidence tampering. Document everything. And be careful. People who fake environmental disasters tend to escalate when their tactics fail. Later that afternoon, old Wendell Pike shuffled towards me with something that felt like lightning in an envelope. His late wife Eleanor had been Sarah's pottery companion and closest friend. Wendell had been secretly documenting Delphine's behavior because he knew Sarah would have wanted her sanctuary protected. Eleanor saved every letter your Sarah wrote about this place, he said, pushing a thick packet into my hands. Inside were 15 years of Sarah's handwritten dreams, conservation plans, sketches, future projects, and private fears that development pressure might one day destroy everything she loved. Her final letter mentioned contacting lawyers about certain neighbors who saw land only as profit. Eleanor's chemical smell mixed with the earthy scent of pottery clay as I realized this wasn't just land. It was sacred ground. And Delphine wasn't just stealing property, she was desecrating Sarah's legacy. That night, sorting through boxes in the pottery studio, I found an envelope tucked behind jars of glaze labeled in Sarah's neat handwriting. Property insurance. Keep safe. Inside lay the 1987 original boundary survey of Meadowbrook and brittle correspondence between Sarah's grandfather and the original developer. The documents smelled like old wood and pressed flowers, but what they contained hit like a thunderbolt.
The letter began almost cheerful, a friendly pitch about exciting community redevelopment opportunities, until the tone shifted into veiled threats about ending assessment hikes and possible code enforcement scrutiny. Sarah hadn't told me any of this, but she'd been quietly working with attorney Rebecca Chang behind the scenes, building a record of harassment. Her handwritten notes painted the real picture. Delphine's firm was in the middle of a major sale of Meadowbrook to Pacific Northwest Property Management for $47 million, with a $2.3 million incentive bonus if she delivered full development authority. And the only piece of land standing in the way of that enormous payday was ours. Sarah had mapped everything out like a detective. She traced Janet's mortgage complications, Wendell's inexplicable tax reviews, Thomas's construction permit denials, all threads leading straight to Delphine's intertwined network of real estate influence and county pressure. This wasn't an HOA president abusing power. It was an orchestrated extortion operation disguised as community leadership. Seeing the timeline in Sarah's handwriting nearly collapsed my chest. Her cancer diagnosis aligned almost exactly with the escalation of Delphine's harassment. While I was working marathon shifts, thinking she was spending quiet days in the pottery studio, my wife had been battling a predatory campaign alone. The emotional strain, the legal warfare, the constant fear, it had all been placed on her already dying shoulders. Delphine hadn't just tormented my wife, she had accelerated her suffering. Then came the letter that broke me open. Sarah's final correspondence to Rebecca Chang, scrawled in shaky pen strokes. The stress is affecting my treatment. I haven't told Rex how bad it's gotten. I don't want to add to his burden while he's watching me fade. If something happens, make sure he understands. Our land isn't just dirt, it's sacred. Please help him protect it. My hands trembled as I read it, surrounded by boxes of evidence Sarah had compiled like a one-woman strike force. Each fraudulent form Delphine had filed was marked with Sarah's calm annotations. Every map showed precise boundaries Delphine pretended didn't exist. And then, tucked beneath the stack, Sarah had highlighted the one clause powerful enough to dismantle Delphine's entire scheme: the development covenant. It granted me the right to demand full financial transparency for any project touching my property, meaning Delphine would be forced to disclose the entire $47 million sale deal, including the performance bonus motivating her crimes. Sarah had pieced together an entire criminal mosaic while undergoing chemotherapy. She had documented forged permits, harassment patterns, financial inconsistencies, coordinated municipal pressure, a corruption ring spanning years. And she did it all quietly, while letting me believe she wanted peace during her treatment. The pottery studio smelled faintly of clay and the faint floral traces of her hand lotion as I sat surrounded by her work. She'd spent her final months not resting, not easing into comfort, but protecting me, our history, and our sanctuary, preparing the trap that would one day crush Delphine completely. I placed a hand on her old apron and whispered a promise. I would finish what she started. Friday morning, the kitchen looked like a war command center. Sarah's evidence was spread across the table in color-coded piles. I called Rebecca Chang, and the sharp gasp she let out told me she understood the magnitude instantly. "Rex, your wife built us a legal warhead," Rebecca said, somewhere between awe and fury. "The covenant alone invalidates everything Delphine has done. But listen carefully. Don't use it yet. Let her keep digging. Let her trap herself deeper. When we drop this, it needs to be catastrophic." It was the most satisfying strategic advice I ever heard. By evening, Wendell's cozy living room had transformed into our covert operations hub. Between the smell of his endless supply of coffee and the warmth of his outdated floor lamp, we formed an alliance that no one would ever suspect. Who would think a group of angry neighbors would assemble a legal insurgency in an elderly widower's home? Our team resembled a mismatched but brilliant resistance unit. Jeanette, armed with accounting software and decades of experience, began tearing through HOA financials. Tomas, with his contractor background, dissected permit trails. Elena, our environmental expert, cataloged Delphine's real violations in other developments. Martha from County Records brought insider access, strictly unofficial, of course. Jeanette made the first major discovery: $47,000 siphoned out of HOA funds into companies quietly owned by Delphine. Murphy's old union wisdom echoed in my head. Greedy ones always pay themselves. They leave fingerprints everywhere. Then Tomas uncovered the pattern. Every legitimate resident request had been buried in endless bureaucratic delays, while every one of Delphine's pet projects sprinted through approval. Elena found environmental breaches at other Delphine properties, real violations, not the imaginary ones she had accused me of. Martha delivered the crown jewel, a chain of county approvals all tied to the same cluster of officials linked to Bradley's bank and Delphine's real estate deals. It was a corruption circuit disguised as local governance. Rebecca's research confirmed our most valuable intel. Delphine's deal deadline was approaching fast. If she failed to deliver complete development rights by the end of the month, the buyer could walk, taking her $2.3 million carrot with them. Desperate people make reckless choices, and desperate criminals create their own downfall. As we expanded our investigation, neighbors slowly trickled in with their own stories. When we combined them, a horrifying pattern emerged. Over 60% of the community had been threatened, intimidated, or manipulated by Delphine's network. They had all been isolated, thinking they were alone, until we finally connected the dots. When investigative journalist Miranda Walsh heard even a fraction of what we had assembled, she nearly dropped her mug. "Rex, this isn't just a story. This is systemic. I've been chasing similar HOA takeovers across a dozen towns. Your evidence could blow a regional corruption ring wide open." Our preparation became almost militaristic. GIS maps, cross-referenced financial trails, environmental reports, permit logs, witness testimony, audio files, security footage, off-site backups, safety protocols. And the sweetest part? We kept everything quiet. We let Delphine think she was winning. Every night, Wendell's kitchen filled with the smell of his famous chocolate chip cookies while we crafted strategies that would one day flip Delphine's empire upside down. My grief transformed into precision. My rage became fuel. My love for Sarah became armor. By the time Delphine's deadline was closing in, we had built a mountain of evidence that could vaporize her entire operation. But we wanted her to keep digging her own grave, and she was obliging perfectly. And then, just when we were ready for the next phase, Wednesday night, 2:04 a.m., my phone lit up in the middle of installing emergency generators at the medical center. Every trail camera on my property erupted at once. Motion alerts stacking in rapid succession. Live footage streamed onto my screen. 3 figures in county uniforms inside my fence line, smashing the windows of Sarah's pottery studio, systematically destroying everything she'd ever loved. And I was 40 miles away, unable to move, unable to leave, forced to watch the destruction unfold in real time.
The first thing I heard on the live security feed was the metallic scream of chainsaws. They weren't just cutting, they were tearing through Sarah's memorial oaks as if they were obstacles, not living reminders of her. Mixed with the chainsaw roar came another sound, the slosh of liquid hitting dirt. Thick, industrial fluids poured directly onto the soil beside her pottery wheels. And then the final cruelty. Someone spray painting environmental hazard in giant red letters across the studio walls, where Sarah's clay-stained handprints still lingered from her last months of creative life. Watching it on my phone felt like being trapped behind glass while my world burned. Her sanctuary, the place where she centered herself as her body was failing, was being mutilated by strangers who didn't even know her name. By sunrise, the scene on my property looked like a disaster zone. Sarah's studio resembled an abandoned reactor site. Containers labeled with county maintenance, authorized personnel only, lay tossed among shattered tools, ruined glaze bottles, and the remains of her kiln. Her lavender bushes, which she'd nurtured through every season, now battled the harsh sting of chemical fumes that clung in the air like poison. My throat tightened as I walked the perimeter, but Rebecca's training echoed in my head. Document everything before reacting. Evidence first, anger later. My cameras had captured every face, Dale's truck, 2 masked accomplices, and their full entry route. Their disguises were laughable, but the theft wasn't. Those chemicals weren't from a hardware store. They'd been taken from a municipal storage yard. That turned this from vandalism into a federal crime involving stolen hazardous materials. Alina arrived within hours, carrying her field kits like a soldier entering a battlefield. The beeping of her sensors cut through the morning silence. "These aren't pottery solvents," she muttered, examining residue. "They're government-issued road maintenance chemicals. Someone with secure access handed these guys the keys." And that's where the strategy shifted. Instead of showing the footage immediately, we let Delphine sprint headfirst into her own grave. By mid-morning, she had already filed urgent contamination alerts, claiming that overnight detection of toxic waste required emergency seizure of my land for the community's protection. As if rehearsed, local news vans rolled up. Delphine stood proudly in front of the planted evidence, waving her arms and spinning dramatic stories about protecting children from dangerous pollutants. Watching the same woman who ordered the attack give impassioned speeches about safety, it was almost therapeutic. The level of delusion deserved footnotes. Her panic told us everything we needed to know. With only days left before her deadline and her multi-million-dollar commission hanging by threads, she had escalated from fraudulent claims to full-scale felony destruction using county resources. But the deeper twist came when we followed the supply chain of the stolen chemicals. The maintenance facility's access logs led straight to Dennis Crocker, brother-in-law to Commissioner Jim Crocker. That connection turned the sabotage into organized corruption. Public materials used to fabricate environmental disasters benefiting private real estate interests. When Inspector Montenegro arrived, his expression alone told me he wasn't buying Delphine's performance. Once we were out of earshot, he said quietly, "Mr. Thornfield, nothing about this contamination matches natural conditions. Wrong chemicals, wrong distribution, wrong timing. Someone staged this." He installed official monitoring stations around the property, essentially turning my land into a government-backed sting operation. If they come back to tamper again, we'll catch them in the act. Something unexpected happened next. The community, even the ones who'd feared Delphine, began to shift. Seeing Sarah's memorial destroyed hit people in places deeper than politics. Janet organized a cleanup crew. She cried as she lifted pieces of pottery from the dirt. "This was Sarah's heart," she whispered. "I can't believe someone would do this." Across the street, Mrs. Peterson shakily handed over her home's security recordings. "She told me she'd have my grandson's car impounded if I didn't support her. I'm done being bullied." And as we pieced together more stories, a bigger pattern emerged. 3 other homeowners had experienced eerily similar environmental emergencies just before being pressured to sell. The consistency was too perfect for a coincidence. Delphine didn't just weaponize regulations, she industrialized vandalism. Rebecca completed our criminal complaint that night. It read less like a property dispute and more like an indictment of a crime syndicate. Conspiracy, false reporting, environmental sabotage, theft of government property, intimidation, and federal offenses carrying 10-year-long sentences. But the emotional blow landed hardest when I stood inside that wrecked studio. The chemical reek clung to the broken shelves where Sarah once kept her glazes. The oak branches she'd loved lay crushed in the mud. Her roses drooped under the chemical fog. And in the middle of it all, I realized something with brutal clarity. This wasn't about defending my land anymore. It was about protecting Sarah's legacy, her final gift to me, from someone who only saw profit where my wife had seen life. Ironically, Delphine had provided the clearest evidence yet of her own guilt. Her desperation finally cracked her empire open. Sarah's long-laid trap was ready. By Friday morning, her countdown had begun. 3 days left before her deadline. 3 days to deliver total development control or lose her $2.3 million reward. And desperate criminals make catastrophic decisions.
Her first move? Bribery. Bold, reckless bribery. She marched straight into Commissioner Crocker's office carrying a black briefcase. Inside, $50,000 neatly stacked. She didn't realize that federal investigators had wired his entire office. Her voice came through on hidden microphones, crystal clear. Health emergencies require flexibility. Sometimes the community's protection demands skipping procedure. She even tapped the stacks of cash with manicured fingers like she was sealing a business deal. But Crocker wasn't the only one she attempted to manipulate. Next, she contacted Pacific Northwest Property Management and declared victory, claiming I had agreed to sell. She filed forged paperwork with a signature so poorly traced it looked like it was done by a child copying homework. My real signature has smooth curves. This one looked like someone drawing with a shaking hand in a moving vehicle. Then came the most unhinged maneuver yet. She filed police reports accusing me of stalking, threatening behavior, and harassment that never occurred. Her narrative was a fantasy novel typed on official letterhead. But Elena saved the day again. She had worn a wire during several consultation meetings with Delphine's people, and the recordings were nothing short of nuclear detonation. "We've staged these environmental crises for years," Delphine bragged, on tape, thinking Elena wanted in on the action. Federal agents didn't just review the tapes, they applauded. But then another twist landed out of nowhere. Pacific Northwest Property Management's legal department launched their own review and uncovered the covenant protecting my land. They found the forged documents, the misrepresentations, the manipulation. Their attorney called Sheriff Santos personally. "Delphine Ashworth has repeatedly misled us. We will testify." Her $50 million deal had turned on her. Then came the phone call I never expected. Governor Jake Sullivan, an old friend from childhood, reached out. "Rex," he said, "the Attorney General's office has been investigating HOA corruption across the state. Your case is the most complete evidence file we've ever seen. We want you to testify before the Legislative Committee. Your story could reshape homeowner protection laws." My wife's garden, her sanctuary, was about to spark state reform. Her legacy was turning into a shield for every family facing HOA abuse. And that momentum exploded when Miranda Walsh released her 3-part investigative series. She mapped Delphine's network of scams across counties, interviewed victims, published timelines, and exposed Delphine's empire to the entire nation. Hundreds of families came forward with similar stories. Social media lit up with hashtag Justice for Sarah. Delphine's supporters fled. Crocker's lawyer announced cooperation. Dale Ashworth denied involvement, and Bradley, Delphine's own husband, filed for divorce, stating she had misused his banking privileges without his consent. Investigators expanded the probe to 12 communities. Estimated damages hit $15 million. And Sheriff Santos worked with federal prosecutors to schedule arrests on Monday morning. The same day Delphine was supposed to deliver her development rights, it would instead become the day her empire collapsed.
The timing couldn't have been more devastating or more effective. Delphine had reached peak panic, frantically clawing for control while every one of her crimes closed in. Standing in what remained of Sarah's battered garden that evening, the fading light casting gold against her recovering roses, I felt an overwhelming sense of her presence. It was as if she were standing beside me, hands in the soil, guiding this final chapter toward justice. Lavender stalks, once crushed under chemical vandalism, now released the faintest hopeful scent as the breeze shifted. Her sanctuary was healing, and her legal trap, years in the making, was almost ready to snap shut. Deadline day, Monday morning. The community center looked like a fire marshal's nightmare. More than 200 residents jammed shoulder to shoulder into a hall built for maybe 100, the scrape of metal folding chairs underscoring tense murmurs rising like static. I walked in with Rebecca at my side, arms full of evidence boxes labeled with color-coded tabs. Behind us were neighbors who had been bullied, shaken down, threatened, and extorted for years. They came not just for answers, they came for closure. Miranda Walsh's camera crew swept in behind us, setting up tripods with the precision of a film set. The air smelled like burnt coffee, old carpet, and adrenaline. Then, Delphine swept into the room. A designer cream suit, a tight smile stretched too wide, one miserable attorney trailing her like a hostage forced into a publicity stunt. She strutted toward the front as if she still believed she controlled the board and all its pieces. She didn't see the checkmate coming. The double doors burst open, and Governor Jake Sullivan entered. A collective choke rolled through the room. Cameras whirled. Delphine froze mid-step, her expression collapsing in real time. When my oldest friend took a front-row seat, it signaled something unmistakable. This was no longer a neighborhood fight. This was a state-level corruption reckoning. Jake took the microphone, voice steady and full of authority. Recent developments in Meadowbrook have exposed widespread HOA corruption and municipal misconduct, he announced. Then he glanced at me with a private, knowing smile. When my friend Rex Thornfield called about officials threatening his deceased wife's memorial garden, I did not expect we'd uncover one of the largest community fraud networks in state history. Delphine's face drained of color. This wasn't just a loss, it was annihilation. My turn. I stepped forward carrying two things: Sarah's favorite photo of her pottery studio, and the 1987 covenant that invalidated every action Delphine had ever taken. I told the room how Sarah had chosen our property for its untouched backlot, how she'd envisioned a pottery studio surrounded by native plants and wildlife, how cancer had taken her, how Delphine had tried to erase her memory with harassment disguised as authority. Then I opened the evidence boxes. Vandalism footage, bribery recordings, forgery exhibits, financial embezzlement spreadsheets, environmental testing results, witness statements, boundary maps, false reports, fraud patterns traced across multiple counties. Each document cracked through the room like a hammer dropping. And then the killing blow. I said, Sarah found something Delphine never imagined still existed. I raised the aged covenant. This agreement permanently removes our land from all HOA jurisdiction. Every notice she issued, every fine she created, every development she promised investors, all of it illegal since the moment she started. A stunned hush swept the room. Then I delivered the final strike. In honor of Sarah's last wish, this property is being donated as the Sarah Thornfield Memorial Wildlife Preserve. No developer, no HOA, no corrupt official will ever touch this land again. The applause shook the walls. Delphine erupted. She accused Crocker, accused the county, accused me, accused grief, accused imaginary conspiracies. Her lawyer tried to pull her back, but she kept digging deeper, ranting about delusional widowers while surrounded by literal video evidence. That was when Sheriff Santos entered, flanked by federal agents. Delphine Ashworth, you are under arrest for fraud, bribery, conspiracy, environmental sabotage, racketeering, and abuse of public office. The handcuffs clicked, a perfect, cold punctuation mark. Her stunned silence as agents escorted her out will replay in community folklore for decades. Arrests unfolded across the county with military precision. Commissioner Crocker taken from his office. Dale surrendered. Multiple officials booked. The entire network fell like rotten scaffolding. Resident testimony turned the day into a truth-telling storm. Janet revealed stolen retirement funds. Wendell's tax manipulation came to light. Thomas's sabotaged business permits surfaced. 20 families described years of harassment masked as HOA enforcement. Then Jake issued his final announcement. The Sarah Thornfield Act will impose strict oversight on all HOA developments, create serious penalties for falsifying documents, and establish guaranteed protections against government HOA corruption partnerships. Sarah's fight had changed state law. 6 months later, autumn washed the memorial preserve in copper and fire. Federal prosecutors brought the hammer down. Delphine pled guilty to 23 counts, including racketeering, fraud, environmental crimes, and conspiracy. 8 years in federal prison, $2.7 million in restitution. Commissioner Crocker received 3 years and a lifetime ban from office. Dale flipped and testified, earning probation. Pacific Northwest Property Management settled for $15.2 million, compensating families across the community. My portion, $280,000, went directly to the Sarah Thornfield Conservation Fund. Janet regained her retirement savings and now travels the country teaching HOA fraud awareness. Wendell leads volunteer operations at the preserve. Thomas's business exploded with growth. Elena's environmental work became the foundation of a national documentation app for homeowners. Our case helped launch the National HOA Reform Alliance, which successfully pushed 17 states toward legislative accountability. Sarah's restored pottery studio has become an educational center where kids learn conservation through clay work, exactly what she dreamed of. Visitors walk her garden daily, breathing in the sweet smell of thriving rose bushes that once nearly died under chemical assault. I now consult on HOA corruption cases nationwide, while Jasper, my one-eyed shepherd, comforts victims in courtrooms across the state. Jake signed the Sarah Thornfield Act on Sarah's own pottery wheel, turning her studio into the birthplace of a nationwide movement. And every morning, coffee in hand, I sit among her roses as sunlight filters through the oak branches she planted. Deer graze along the meadow's edge. Kids laugh inside the studio. The preserve thrives. Justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it sounds like wind through oak leaves. Sometimes it smells like blooming roses after years of poison. Sometimes it arrives in the quiet peace of a sanctuary saved. If you're fighting HOA harassment, hear me clearly. Document everything. Unite with neighbors. Know the law better than they do, and never give corrupt bullies the victory of your silence. Tell your story in the comments. Your voice may be the key that helps someone else escape the same trap. And subscribe. Next week, Janet breaks down how to spot HOA embezzlement before it destroys your community.